This lesson is about how to solve an equation in the form of x cubed equals p, or x to the third power equals p. So the first thing I need you to understand is that you have to memorize certain cubes, and it's from -5 to 5, and you need to know those without having to work them out. So -5 to the third power means -5 times -5 times -5. And that result is -125. -4 to the third power is -64. -3 to the third power is -27. -2 to the third power is -8. -1 to the third power is -1. 0 to the third power is 0. 1 to the third power is 1. 2 to the third power is 8. 3 to the third power is 27. 4 to the third power is 64. And 5 to the third power is 125. So you should be making flashcards for each of those and making sure that you can memorize those quickly. When you see problems that deal with these numbers, you'll be able to get the answers very quickly. And that's called fluency. So we need to work on our fluency. Let's go ahead and move on to the big idea. The big idea is that inverse operations cancel each other out. So keeping inverse operations in mind, the inverse of cubing a number, x cubed, is taking the cube root of it. So you already know what a square root looks like. A cube root looks very, very similar. It still has the radical symbol, but it has a little tiny 3 inside the check mark. So that means cube root. So the parts of a radical, we've talked about these before, except for the index. The index is the teeny tiny number in the check mark. So in the cube root, the index is 3. So that's the index. The radical symbol is simply what you know as the square root sign. So that's the radical symbol. And you already know that the radicand is the number underneath the radical symbol. The number under the radical symbol is called the radicand. So if I come back up here and put an x in there, the radicand would be the x, the number underneath the radical symbol. Alright, so let's take a look at some examples, and please note that if any of the memorized numbers that I have listed on the top of the paper are the radicand, you're expected to do those without a calculator. If the numbers aren't one of those, then you would use a calculator to determine the answers. So example 1 down here, we have x cubed equals 64. So what we're going to do is find the inverse of cubing, which is taking the cube root. So we're going to take the cube root of both sides. Now, don't forget that index of 3. If we forget the index, it becomes a square root, which will give us a different answer. Now notice that I'm not putting a plus or minus sign in front, because cube roots only have one answer, either a positive or a negative, or a 0. So the cube root and the cube cancel each other out, and we are left with x on the left. Now 64 is one of those memorized numbers up top, and if you look, 4 to the third power equals 64, so therefore the cube root of 64 is equal to 4. And that's our answer. Let's move on to number 2. We're going to take the cube root of both sides, so the cube root of x cubed on the left, and the cube root of -8 is on the right. The cube root and the cube are inverse operations, so those cancel, and we're left with x equals, and then -8 is one of our memorized numbers at the top, you should see that negative 2 to the third power is equal to negative 8, which means that the cube root of negative 8 is negative 2. Now let's check each one of those. So the check is to make sure that 4 to the third power really does equal 64. So it's 4 times 4 times 4. 4 times 4 is 16, and 16 times 4 equals 64. So it does work. In this check, we're going to make sure that negative 2, in parentheses, to the third power really does equal negative 8. So negative 2 times negative 2 times negative 2. So that's a positive 4 times a negative 2, and that really does equal negative 8. So there's my check. Alright, so for number 3, 216 is not one of the memorized numbers. So what we're going to do is we're going to grab our calculators. Make sure you have a calculator to try this on. And we are going to do the cube root in our calculator. So let me show the work first. You have the cube root of x cubed and the cube root of 216. So the cube root and the cube cancel, and we're left with just an x on the left. Now, in order to do this in your calculator, I'm going to show you a calculator on the screen. You're going to do the cube root of 216. So here's my calculator. The first step is right here, step number 1, right here. Because you're finding the cube root, we're going to type in a 3 into the calculator. So type your 3 in. The second step is up here. You're going to hit the second button. And then the third step is here. You're going to hit the caret button. And so if you notice above the caret button, you have a little symbol there. It's hard to see on this screen, but the symbol looks like this. X inside the root button, or the radical sign. So the X is why we typed in the 3, because we told it that we wanted the 3 to be there. And then after you have that in your calculator, so on your calculator screen it will look like 3x and then the radical symbol, you're going to type in 216 and then hit equals. And if you did it correctly, you should get 6 as the answer. So back here, the cube root of 216 is 6. Alright, so let's try another one, but number 4 is not a perfect cube, so we're going to get a decimal. So we're going to round to the nearest tenth. So let's put that down here, round to the nearest tenth. And we are going to take the cube root of both sides, the cube root of 350, the cube root and the cube cancel each other out there. Those are inverse operations. And then on my calculator, again, I'm going to start with the 3. Then I'm going to hit second. Then I'm going to hit the caret button. So that will give me the cube root. And then I'm going to type in 350. So 350. And when I do that, I will get 7.047298, and it continues on because this is called an irrational number, since 350 was not a perfect cube. Now I told you I wanted to round to the nearest tenth, so that's this spot. So I look at the 4, since it's less than 5, the 0 stays the same. So if I round this to the nearest tenth, I get x equals 7.0. And that is my solution to the problem. And that summarizes topic 3.2, solving x cubed equals p.